Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Connor Bronson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Aarathi Vidyasagar, VP of Engineering at LinkedIn. Aarathi, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
You've got some really interesting perspectives that you're bringing. And according to new data recently released by LinkedIn, the demand for soft skills among engineers is on the rise. It's something you and I have talked about a little bit. In this 6-month period from 2022 to 2023, across the US, UK, and India markets, communication was consistently in the top 5 for skills gaining the most share and demand. And at the same time, I know there's a previous LinkedIn study that found that engineers with strong soft skills are promoted 13% faster than those with only technical skills. And we've seen this even continue to rise in importance as this is happening with the backdrop of Gen AI's transformation of software development. Do you think that these industry changes are helping drive the desire for communication and other soft skills among engineers?
I think I want to start with soft skills have been something that's important throughout, right? I mean, it's not new, but with the onset of generative AI and coming in and taking away some of the mundane, like, your coding, etc. It's how do you differentiate yourself? So as an engineer, you've got to bring things that are not easily replicable. And so things like communication, leadership, soft skills become even more important. They've always been important. Like if you look at, success criteria, if you look at leaders in the industry today, you would see that a lot of it has to do with communication, leadership, like the soft skills do play a big role in terms of growth, etc. But now it's just ever more important. Like, going back to like our mathematical theorem, while it was sufficient once upon a time, I think it becomes necessary now with the changes that are coming in, because some of the other skills that kind of helped you stand out might be easily replicable now with generative AI and the tech changes that are coming in.
And we've had variations of this conversation here on Dev Interrupted before. Our listeners may be kind of groaning hearing me talk about communication. They're like, oh, every leader who's really good at their job talks about the importance of communication. I think the difference here is LinkedIn has this massive pool of data to back this up and say, look, we can actually look at the job market and say, this is something that's highly valued. This is something that is increasing in importance. And it aligns, to your point, to these transformational shifts that are happening in how software development works today.
Yep. I think, look, LinkedIn's been doing this whole skills-based hiring, understanding skills, mapping skills. Like this has been a journey that's not started just because of the generative AI movement. But now that it's happened, us having this information and this breakdown just makes it like even more important to kind of see where the trends go. Right? Like what are the trends that people are looking at? What skills are like most important here? How do we begin to differentiate? This is where we as engineering leaders have to come together, start looking at what we now call a talent map, a skills map, to see what those gaps are, what those trends are, and where do we need to go. So I think it's super important to know that soft skills, again, not easily replicable. So again, nothing new, right? This is not a new formula. This is something that's been true. For us to be good engineers, you've got to bring the set of people along with you. Communication becomes key. Again, we're not talking about oratorial skills, right? That's not what we're asking for. Just being able to like communicate your ideas, bringing the team along is what you're looking for. And a lot of that distills into what differentiates. It's that little bit of salt in the dish that makes you better.
And I think you're really apt here because we see other technology transformations that may not necessarily wholesale change what's happening within a market or industry like software development, but it does accelerate underlying conditions.
Yep.
And as you pointed out, communication has been crucial for leaders for years. How do you manage a product team? How do you make sure that your relationships within the org are tight so that you get the backing and support and resources you need? How do you make sure your team's actually staying on track and aligned to business priorities, actually getting the work done that you need to get done? But we're also seeing this major transformation in how software development itself may work in the coming years, whether that's on the no-code side, whether that's prompt engineering, changing where we spend our focus on workflows. How and how much do you see software development changing in the coming years?
I think, again, going back to us understanding skills, I think there's a study on LinkedIn where we saw, or we were expecting, that 50% of the skills to do a job, it was going to change by 2030. And what we saw is from 2015 to 2023 is when that kind of change happened. with the onset of, technological changes like, generative AI, we expect the curve for that to become a lot steeper. As in, like, I think in another 5 years, we will be expecting, I think we expect it to be 68% of the skills to do a job is going to be changing. Like, to put it in perspective, 2/3 of what I needed to do my job, 15 years ago, it looks very different. So there's a saying that our CEO uses quite a bit, which is jobs are not changing. I mean, we're not changing jobs, but jobs are changing on us. And that's very true, right? So what skills we need to do the same job 15 years ago to today is going to be completely different. So with that as a backdrop, so really think about where we are as software engineering leaders, just software engineers, right? So we have to be upskilling, reskilling, thinking about what does it mean? What does it mean to be a full stack engineer is very different from what it was when I started life. And now I'm going to begin to date myself and tell you I'm a fossil, literally, to, what it is today. I mean, there were like differentiated fields like, ops engineers or SREs, those quality engineers, different stuff. And over time, all of those have been merging, right? So the team structure, the team formations have changed. And with the most recent sort of changes with AI kind of becoming ubiquitous, what we see now is I think full stack should include a reasonable awareness, understanding, and competency in the field of AI, ML, and understanding data science. Like without that, you can't be an effective software engineer. So how do you then, as a software leader, kind of help enable, transform your teams the right way? Again, nothing that we haven't done before. Remember, we've gone through the no QA revolution. We've gone through the, ops engineering becoming DevOps. So it's not like this particular ecosystem has sustained all these changes. We've been able to do it, but I think it's a constant change. The big differentiation now is that the pace of change, I think, is what is going to be the challenge that we'll have to keep up with.
It is funny to think about this because I think you'll hear a lot of successful people like yourself talk about this need for reskilling, this need for being a lifelong learner and loving learning. And my wife, Catherine, talks about the fact that her job that she does, which is CRM automation and lifecycle management, didn't really exist when she went to high school. Like it was barely a thing. Salesforce was just getting started. And this is, I think, true for a lot of us, where the definition of, as you point out, a full stack engineer has changed over the years. How we do our jobs day by day is changing over the years. So how are you approaching that skill transition at LinkedIn for your team of more than 600 engineers?
Again, like I said, I think the challenge, like it's not a new problem. Like we've had to reskill, upskill changes. I mean, again, at the risk of dating myself, when I studied CS, it was more in the Perl, C++. And I don't know if you're folks that are like, developers, like doing memory allocations, knowing how like sort of the basics work, to Java, to where we are today. I think a lot has changed. I think the big piece here is the pace of change, the rate of change that is going to be there. So I think this is where being that mapping of what skills we need to where we need to go. So constant need for upskill, reskill, constant need to sort of think about what are some specialist roles and what are some generalist roles in the team. So as leaders, encouraging, I mean, like, look, most developers, most people like me that have gone through the cycle are honestly academicians at heart. Like, this learning and getting to learn, it's second nature to us. You've gone through so many years of studying, this whole learning is something that comes more and more naturally. So I would be like really highly recommend that. But I think with the pace of change, one of the things that we are trying to do, and remember, I am, as part of my job, I also run the LinkedIn Learning product. So this is where, like, curating the right bite-sized learning opportunities to upskill. So there's this pace of like, how can I give people the right amount of knowledge so they can get to the right level? Because I don't think we're getting to PhD level of upskilling, reskilling. It's going to happen at a rapid pace. Versus, can I know enough to be that sort of, reasonably good at being more of the generalist? And then, of course, there's going to be the need for the specialists and then opportunities to get deep in there. And that's a whole different, like your traditional education system. But a lot of what we're trying to do, even with LinkedIn Learning courses, and here's where I want to make a pitch for my product, is putting those bite-sized, learning courses out. So we've I think generated over 250 like AI-based courses. We do about 14, like 23 different languages. This is where, like, I think, and this is not just LinkedIn Learning, right? Like most learning platforms now are coming into that world of giving the right, like, sort of set of information that's current, like tasty enough. So just to give you an example, some of the things that we've tried with my sort of team is educating the leaders, which is the managers, to become savvy and aware, to understand what generative AI means and what does the technology stack mean, what do systems, what's the machinery that goes into it. And then sort of enabling much deeper coursework for more hands-on, giving opportunities for learning for engineers to kind of, like, from an apps domain, sort of dabble into prompt engineering, which is probably the entry level into more of the data world, right? So I think just sort of encouraging that slow transformation, again, to get more of the data generalists in the system as the full stack, and then sort of giving the right opportunities for people who might want to go deeper into that specialist world. I mean, there's a big difference. The deep AI folks are the PhDs who understand all of the depth of, deep linear, regression equations, etc., which is not something that'll come naturally. I mean, I, for example, hate statistics or never survived or thrived in it. But again, need to know enough to be at least aware and empathize with the team and be able to do that. So again, a big part about is encouraging that. So as a culture, sort of changing the emphasis for learning and reskilling, providing the right opportunities for people to get that taste of, what that reskilling would look like, to, deeper and better opportunities there. But again, I think this is where the opportunity for online classes, democratizing some of that education system, I think is going to become more and more important for us. Again, technical revolution here. It's easy to curate and make those courses and bring it to life. I think you see a lot of startups come in here. And as a learning product owner, we see a lot of that competition as well.
You mentioned something there that I want to dig into a bit, which is that there's definitely a need for improvement for generalists, people to pick up skills and understand some of these new technologies, some of these new approaches. And there's also this need for specialists. And I wonder if you think the ratio of those needs is starting to change with the current era of software development and how it's transitioning. Do you think engineering leaders should be constructing their teams or changing those ratios of specialists to more generalists, or maybe even like more leadership roles, compared to how they were doing it in the past?
Yeah, I think, like, remember, there was in the previous world, or at least the traditional sort of differentiation between AI versus apps. If you really think about it, the AI teams were mostly the specialists that went deep into sort of the models, etc. I think with this sort of change of tech and the pace at which we're going, we're going to get to a world where a lot of our sort of platforms, open source, going to be the no code, low code kind of areas where lots of the model marketplace is going to be just like robust, right? And then there's a little bit of the marriage of what you want to do. So I think this is where you can be like pretty effective in being able to sort of use that catalog of information with the sort of generalists. So you do need the generalists, but you can't, like, I think that the need for specialists doesn't go away, because who then builds these platforms and the
Right.
like the deeper sort of, the chat GPT kind of technology platforms, right? I think it's just, it may not be the nature. I think there's going to be a whole segment of platform development that changes to this whole, how do I build the low code, no code, broader case of depth there, and then the utilization of that and how that sort of changes into the applications and the applicability, I think is going to become different. So I think there's going to be a little bit of difference. So for somebody like me that runs like an application team that builds on top of a lot of these platforms, I would expect that I need to get more of the generalists while start beginning to depend on more and more of the platform developers. our partnership with OpenAI, Microsoft, kind of stuff, like more and more. Because the pace of change, the depth of sort of changes and the technological changes, the pace at which is going, if you're not somebody who's innovating in that sort of deep space, you will not be moving at the pace. Like it'll be hard for you to kind of keep pace. You'll keep yourself, keep falling behind. So I think this need for adaptability to this open source, being able to sort of like at the current pace, I think it's going to become more and more important. So again, it depends on who you are. Like if you are, AWS, OpenAI, I think the kind of mix that you're going to have, probably your need for specialists more versus if you were a Salesforce or Workday or a product team or a startup coming up in an area. I think the kind of things that you need to do would look a little bit different.
That makes total sense. And I imagine this is somewhere where LinkedIn probably feels well positioned, given that we're seeing more and more repeated tasks become automated, and LinkedIn's had this consistent skills first hiring approach. Do you think that LinkedIn as a company is well positioned for this new era?
Yeah, I mean, just think about the mission for LinkedIn, right? Is to connect every member of the workforce with opportunity. And so this has been a problem space. Like work and connecting people to work has been an area that we've been ideating for, years now. This is what we do. So again, having that framework of skills just kind of helps us like bring and make that automation that much more easier, right? So even for us to be able to sort of think about what are some disruptable skills versus what are some augmentable skills with generative AI, what are skills, that new skills that might come up to where is directionally, where are people going? I think this is where LinkedIn's well positioned, because of who we are and the platform and our sort of economic graph, understanding some of those changes in the nuances and also helping that transformation. Right? As we help, define jobs, understand jobs, work. I think being at the heart of that is going to be a big piece of what we do. And that's actually why I come into work every day and I'm excited about it.
Well, you're making a good pitch for the company, so I'm sure the PR team's happy to hear it. And I do think, though, there are going to be some engineers who listen to this conversation and get a little worried and think, you know what, how do I balance sharpening my technical skills, especially as the kind of what is state of the art is constantly changing and changing aggressively right now, while also trying to develop, more leadership skills and move into leadership and add my communication skills. Like how do you balance that as someone who is maybe early or mid-career?
I think my advice to people is this always on learning is a really, really good mantra for somebody who's in any kind of like a technological role. I don't think it's a new thing, right? I mean, if every leadership conversation I've had, I've talked about, I've always been a lifetime learner. Challenges sort of pushing myself on the boundaries of learning new things, not becoming too comfortable has always been something that's driven me. Only difference now is, again, I go back to the analogy of it was a sufficient thing, but now it just becomes necessary. So you just have to become very intentional about it. And I don't think you can just leave it to chance or be organic about it. Right. So I think this is where you also have to understand that things are changing. You have to keep pace. So you kind of have to invest in that learning cycle, just becoming very intentional. And this is not just on the engineers and the individuals. So I don't want to throw the onus of that, upskilling, reskilling, and just on the engineers themselves. I think we all as organizations need to enable that transformation, recognize the cost for that transformation, and shepherd that. And if we can't do that, I think we will fail our engineers, and that's not the right place to be in. So I think as a leader, I kind of see that as one of my biggest roles in this moment is to make sure, how do I make sure I give people a space to learn? I make it okay to spend that time and just make that a very intentional thing. I mean, again, just a little bit of the culture thing. I think a long time ago, I'd read a book, Atomic Habits, so change little things, and so that it becomes a pattern over time. So this bite-sized learning kind of fits into that. Like, how do you then encourage that, recognize that, give people the space and time. So I think this is all where if we as organizations need to start making this kind of move from that sufficient condition to necessary condition transition, just needs to be something that we all have to come together and make it very intentionally.
I completely agree. I think it can be challenging sometimes, especially in high pressure roles at companies that are driven to achieve, to make that time for learning. And that's where I think leadership and organizations need to be really intentional, because it's hard in the moment to see, oh, well, I have to deliver, these different epics. We need to complete this new product line. We have these challenges to do. We have products to roll out. We have, business critical things. But if we ignore the bigger picture of how are we building for the long term, how are we building our teams for the long term, we burn people out. We don't set them up for success at the next stage. And we risk so much. And that could be a really challenging thing for leaders to navigate. So I'm glad we're having this conversation about it. I want to drill back in around soft skills, because we've talked a bit about communication and some of these kind of crucial project leadership, project management skills that really help enable people to get things done at companies. What specific skills or techniques would you advise people who are moving into engineering leadership to think about honing?
Yeah, I think, communications leadership sometimes becomes such generic terms. For me, I think, look, end of the day, communication as a leader, sort of the biggest challenge you have to face, or you will face, is bringing your team along on ideas, product, technology.
Almost like evangelizing that part of communication.
And so the most crucial skill, which then as you grow, through the sort of corporate ranks, becomes that's a skill that you start using outward, to your peers, then to your sort of, superiors, and then to cross-functional leaders. The scope or the aperture for that kind of changes. So I think a biggest piece is that crisp communication of intent and the why and the idea of bringing people along, because it's never, a lot of people, I've got teenage kids who are like, well, you're the boss, you get to tell people what to do and they'll do it. And in all honesty, that's not how the world works, right? It's a little bit of, I've got to convince my team, this is what, this is a great idea, here's why it's going to be good for us, this is the vision. You got to get them excited, because when you do it right, it's a wonderful experience, versus do it because I say so is just never the right sort of form to do it. So I think for me, communication is about that. How do you sort of message and appeal to your audience, whoever that audience is, whether it's your boss, whether it's your peers, whether it's your customer, or even just your team. I think just distilling that, and that's a truly soft skill, right? Because it's a little bit of it's more of an art than a science at this moment. It's understanding your audience, what sort of makes them tick, in that moment, sort of distilling that, and then being able to communicate. So I think it's just that, and is also why something that AI probably can't sort of do it as effectively, because you and I are talking. So this is me understanding what is Connor like, or what would sort of, make him tick, and then sort of, adjusting it. So it's also maybe in some ways saying there is a salesman role in you that you have to hone and sort of bring it to the right sort of efficacy. So in all honesty, sometimes I've always joked about it, but I do think it's actually a good exercise. Is everybody should do a tour of duty in sales. I think that'll help you kind of learn some of that art, because that's the art, right? From a communications perspective, to kind of nail it.
I hate to admit it, but one of the most formative jobs I ever had was a summer job when I was in college, where I did door-to-door fundraising for a nonprofit. And it was really, really hard. It was honing sales skills. It was talking to all these people. It was trying to, develop my emotional intelligence. I cried a couple times doing that job. It was hard. I had quotas to meet. And it's one of the things that I've learned the most from and been able to grow as a person out of. So I completely agree. I think this kind of ability to sell an idea and pitch people, I think a lot of folks in software development want to think they're, I don't know, I'll say like too good for sales sometimes, where it's like, oh, my product's going to be incredible. It's going to sell itself. And there's something to be said for product virality and the ability to have a product that can, have a great K factor and spread itself. But you still need to be able to be great at distribution. You still need to be able to get your team on board because, as you said, the difference between someone who's inspired and fired up to work on something and thinks they're making a difference and thinks what they do is impactful versus someone who's just checking a box to get a salary is huge. It also brings up something else, which is kind of the collaboration factor. So you've talked a lot about like, how do you inspire your team? How do you bring them along? How do you get your team to work together themselves better?
Again, a lot of software engineers, developers that I meet, like, I mean, all of us engineers, we like to believe we are introverts, which we probably are, by the way, right? And so there's a myth of it's not something that comes naturally to you, but I think they are actually pretty orthogonal, right? I mean, yes, you can be an introvert. That doesn't mean you cannot communicate or learn that skill and be able to, like, you don't have to be a social bee to be able to do what this is. I honestly think I'm an introvert, but I mean, here I am talking to you on a podcast and I guess talking more than one sentence. So, and the moment, it's not about that, right? It's more about what you feel passionately about and can you bring that out, and doing justice to who you are, I think, becomes an important thing. Again, like it's those things that, like, don't convince yourself that you can't or you won't be able to do it, because I think they're two separate ideas and concepts that you need to keep. Again, very, very important, like, for us to be able to do this. I think people stumble through it. Like when I was younger, or when I was contemplating like management, I always believed that, I won't be good at it. Like, I just say, I'm a developer. I love, doing me, my computer, my program. And that was like what it was. That was who I was. And somehow I didn't believe that I would be able to, bring people along and lead. And that somehow scared me. But everybody around me was like, you're really good at it. And I was grateful for having that sort of, peer group that encouraged me to do that. And I've been a leader for like over 20 years now, and I have never looked back. But when I originally took over the role, I remember like talking to our director then, sort of making sure it's a completely reversible reaction, and I can go back if I didn't like it. And she was. She just laughed at me. She said, I don't think you're going to need it. But there was something about it. So again, this is where I would say, I think, very, very important. Again, not like there's a lot of myths and things that we say to ourselves, which is not true.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of folks who are in leadership who start off, if not continue to have this self-doubt. I know I do. And for me, I know it's part of being very self-critical and thinking about like, oh, well, like, yes, I'm good at this thing, but I have so much to improve. Like, I see all these holes. I see all the gaps. I seek that critical feedback. So I cannot see how much I still have to learn. And I think it's really easy to let that self-doubt, unless you get other sources of feedback and information, qualitative or quantitative, to kind of rule you and let you go, oh, well, I'm not the right person for this. And as someone who also is like a natural introvert and, recharges from, sitting at home playing video games and working on my own projects and reading a book, like building those extroversion skills, those external communication skills has had to at times be really intentional. And I think something I found is that over time, I find that I gain a lot more joy from doing those tasks, doing that kind of communicative organizing. But it's something that it's a passion I've built, not something that I kind of came hardwired with. And I suspect you maybe feel similarly.
Yeah, I can guarantee if you poll a sample of engineers, that'll be the answer. But again, going back to, you have to be intentional in some of these. Barrier to entry exists, but it's mostly in terms of how we've convinced ourselves. I think they're very doable. So yes, and it's just going to become even more critical as the landscape of work is changing around us. And what we bring to the table. So again, very important for all of us to kind of push the boundaries on what we can, right? So I think that's sort of the key. So algorithmic smarts is going to be so automated that that's not going to differentiate you. So you got to figure out what that differentiation is going to be. Again, no different from, any transformation that we've been to. That's the piece I want everybody to anchor on. This is the conversation I have with all of my engineers as well, is this is not the first time we're making such a transformation. This muscle exists. We've improved on it. I think it's just a matter of continuation. It's just the tactics and the pace is what differs in the moment.
And I'll say tactically, I love that when you first took on a leadership role within engineering, you were given that opportunity to try it out too. I've talked to several folks who have had that experience. We at Linear B have had people, try out being a team lead for a while and say, I actually do want to be a principal engineer instead. I really want to take that technical track. And so I think this is where companies and mentors that kind of enable people to try on leadership and learn is so crucial. And so I love that you're bringing that perspective to your teams and really encouraging microlearning and building leaders throughout the organization to lead from every seat, to borrow a phrase from some folks. And I know there's another concept that you've thought quite a bit about, which is developer experience. How can we help our developers, help our team leads, help our entire engineering organization, help the industry itself be a place where we are more joyful in work, where we get to deal with less really annoying minor headaches that make our jobs harder and get to be more inspired about the products we're working on, which is something I know you're passionate about. And this obviously ties in tightly to developer productivity. They're kind of twin concepts, almost two sides of the same coin. And it's becoming increasingly important, increasingly talked about. With the rise of AI-assisted code, this trend is only continuing. How are you approaching these twin concepts of developer experience and productivity in your role?
I mean, LinkedIn's always been at the forefront of developer productivity and experience. Just anecdotally, you will see I'll kind of bring some of these stories from sort of experience as well. I moved from my previous company to LinkedIn. I joined as a senior director here. And the first thing in my previous company, I'd spent like 19 years. So I had written code, grown up there. So I knew practically every semicolon in the code base. So coming into a company like LinkedIn, not knowing all of the code was something that I felt kind of, untethered in the moment. So, and I remember asking my teams, hey, help me sort of write code. I want to say that in my first week, I checked in code. I think it was 17 minutes from, time to check in to actually have, my 2 lines of HTML statement, however small it may be, to make it to production. So sort of make that production footprint, this was 6 years ago, was phenomenal sort of to get there. So LinkedIn, to some degree, has always sort of, prided itself on being that company that's at the forefront of thinking about developer productivity, happiness, and going first class at it. But the way, just bringing us back to the conversation, I think there's also a moment with all of the technological changes with generative AI, etc. The opportunity for disruption here is high. So we're going to see a whole bunch here where, whether it's within the company or whether there's third-party tools, where we're going to see more and more of that efficiency sort of coming in, right? So again, in terms of how are we thinking about it is of course, bringing in that disruption, bringing in the tools, being aware of what those efficiencies are. We are in a mature company with code bases that are over 10 years, obviously migrations and things like that. Typically, there's always this we you call it, the sort of tax of maintaining a legacy code base. I think making all of that cheaper, better, easier becomes something that we can actually improve on. It's not one of those things where everybody's you've got to do your time, is no longer going to be true. And so excited for that. But I kind of anchor us back to, and I believe this is also some of the developer productivity, happiness sort of framework that we've talked about is LinkedIn in the open source world, is more on measurement. It starts with understanding where your bottlenecks are, measuring the right stuff, and then sort of cranking down on where those inefficiencies are and the right tools. Whether it's building the right tools or buying the right tools, I think given the market and where we are, I think a lot of that is going to change in terms of landscape and sort of. So step one would be to know what those bottlenecks are. I think most recently we've done a few of our sort of API migrations, which have been pretty much, code gets generated, sort of put into the system, runs the test, very few breakages where human beings get involved. again, I will challenge you to find any single developer who'll probably tell you that's a bad idea, or I'm afraid that my job's gone away, because it is not, because this just frees up more time for you. But it's a few things as a team, as an organization, is giving that measurement, understanding your ecosystem, and where your teams are spending time, and what is the mundane time versus not, like just instrumentation. And maybe that's the right way to sort of frame it, to web bottlenecks, and then sort of bringing the right sort of tech and tool, and enabling this. But this is one area I think which should be like, it's the right marriage, if you will, right? Like I think
Yeah.
this is where it'll be like, I don't think you'll find anybody that complains about it. A lot of the sort of agentic world, or agents, etc., is what we're talking about in terms of generative AI, becomes this, somebody's doing the work while you're like not actively involved. That's huge. Really think about it. Sometimes I jokingly call them smart cron jobs, but end of the day, this is again me dating myself. But at the end of the day, think of the power of that, right?
Yeah. I'll say we're putting out some research soon. It might actually be out by the time this podcast comes out. We'll see about what we're seeing around the data on AI agents and automating PRs and automating code and increasing that velocity. I'm excited to share that with the world. And for folks who are looking to kind of start from those base principles you mentioned of like, okay, we want to understand our developer experience and our productivity, you can go to linearb.io/resources. We can get your Dora metrics to you for free. And there's also a guide to kind of setting up software engineering intelligence, so you can have that observability of what your processes are like. You can set up a free survey instance and kind of get rolling. And there's a lot more you can do in depth there, but that's a great place to get started. You mentioned something really interesting on the automation side of things, and kind of approaching automations to support your devs, about automating migrations. Can you expand on that a bit?
Again, I'll anchor back to the sort of easiest example, right? I mean, when you're a large company, you've been around for 20 plus years, you got a legacy code base, and you change code. Like sometimes front end technology changes, that's also rapidly changing in terms of back end, in terms of how we do APIs, containerization. There's a gamut of things that you kind of have to upkeep to sort of adapt to the newer world. And it says, again, think of what we typically did to kind of make through some of those changes. I think this is where previously it would be a set of things that we'd have to do, libraries that you upgrade, then you kind of upgrade all your builds. There's a huge change list of things. Some are not backward compatible, so a human being has to get involved. And you'd kind of put this in, like run through some manual testing or automated testing, sort of go through your sort of certification process, etc. Imagine a world where like your biggest bottleneck, so why did human beings have to get involved, is that whole sort of resolution of it's not backward compatible, I need to change it, like da da da. So all of that, if in today's world, if you can understand better, do better, and sort of change it, I think that removes that barrier to sort of, it makes it that low touch. And then so you build it in a way where we're not spending hours and days of it becomes grunt work. I mean, I think accessibility changes sometimes become like that too, right? Like, you kind of have to get the right sort of form factor in there, sort of your scrolls, etc. But sometimes it is very cookie cutter work. It really doesn't require a lot of it's just standardized changes. You could get a lot of that going faster, better, and easier, because it's no longer just like patterns, but it's smart patterns, right? Where you've understood and you've seen enough code that you know how this is resolved. Again, it's for a company like LinkedIn, it's got millions, terrible millions of lines of code here. Easier to kind of get some of that understanding and the smarts in there. So again, this is opportunity is large.
And I think particularly for enterprises like LinkedIn, when you have these aggregate gains where maybe you save a developer an hour every week, and you see that go across the organization, that is a massive savings.
Yeah.
One area where we're already seeing that is Gen AI is being leveraged to write tests for code, and that's making an immediate impact. It appears there may be an even bigger opportunity ahead here. What are you seeing in that area?
And again, I want to anchor on, yes, time saved is great for the company because you've sort of increased your productivity, but you're going to take away from the happy developer right? I mean, this is
Great point.
like, I cannot put a value to that because I can't tell you how many times I've had like, developers come to me and like to have career conversations. It's like almost feels like I'm just kind of doing this rinse and repeat stuff. I'm not learning much. I'm not innovating. So there's always that conversation of, I'm not excited for doing all this stuff. I'd like to build stuff from, scratch. Like, what is the lure of like startup sometimes? It is that, right? Like, I can actually, I
Yes.
don't have the weight to a larger code base and I can just like build ground up stuff to like now you can actually give them the time to do some of that. And it's exciting and you kind of have the best of both worlds. So I think this is where I would say, yes, it's time saved and productivity for the company and probably, more code and better code for us. But at the same time, it's happy developers. So it's just, and then motivated developers. So I think that's something that you can't take away from it.
Do you see this opportunity to improve other day-to-day processes like code reviews, for example?
Yeah. Code reviews, bug triage, a lot of LinkedIn you can do shake for feedback if you don't like it. And the shake for feedback comes in. It goes through some level of automation, but eventually there is a set of human beings that sort of look at it. Imagine a world where you could do shake for feedback, goes into a system. The triage system is able to pick it up, replicate it, debug it to a level, and then sort of, bring it to finally when it does come to the developer, it's also literally like fully, here's the, stack call tree for where the problem's happening or not happening, kind of stuff. So yes, I think there's opportunity here in terms of like areas of software development that can change. Again, every time I say this, everybody's like, does this mean I'm not going to have a job? It's like, and I keep saying like, that's not true, right? I think the kind of job that you're going to do is going to be looking different. Going back to the point I had made earlier, the skills you needed to do a job that's going to look very different in a few years. It's just what you're going to be doing in your job probably looks very different. And hopefully you're having fun doing that. And that's how you should take a look at it. So again, in the moment, that would be the advice I would give to people.
I think you're spot on. And I think it's really true of almost any job, which is if you stay long enough, you will have to learn things. You will have to learn a new database. You will have to figure out these new skills. You will have to grow to stay in that role because the company's going to change around you. The goals are going to change around you. The world's going to change around you. That's like the constant of life. And I think what folks are maybe nervous about right now is the pace of the change happening,
Yes.
how transformational it is in some of the areas where people have felt really confident on the technical side. They're now going, oh, this is really changing. But if you develop your skills here, if you do these micro learnings that Aarthi's talking about, and if you build your communication skills and work better with your colleagues, you're going to be really well positioned for the future here. So Aarthi, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your insights with our audience, and I hope everyone found it valuable.
Excited to be here. Lovely conversation. This is something I do and I'm exceptionally passionate about. I'm a builder at heart, so I'm excited for where we are. As an engineer, I am and a learner. I'm super, super excited for what lies ahead and how much change it is. And I'm glad that this is a transformation that I am getting to see in my lifetime.
Absolutely. And I definitely hear that passion coming through from you. And hopefully our audiences as well. If you enjoyed this conversation with Aarthi, I would say send this podcast to a friend who you think would also find value in it. This is a kind of a scary time as far as how fast this transformation is happening. But it doesn't have to be. It can be exciting. It can be an opportunity. You can also get more info about Aarthi, LinkedIn, and from our DevInterrupted team at devinterrupted.substack.com. And look for a follow-up article talking more in depth about these topics coming soon. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. And Aarthi, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.